So we are continuing in our series, Shepherding the Flock of God, and it is very instructive for both prospective elders and members alike. There's really very good information in the book. I can't say that I agree with everything he says, but I agree with a lot of it. And so today's topic can be a bit of a sticky wicket. Not that we have sticky wickets here, but because we don't play a lot of cricket. But honestly, the idea of going after people who have wandered away, that's both uncomfortable to talk about, and it's also uncomfortable to do. But the truth is, more people disappear than we would like to admit. Now, for us, it's fairly commonplace because we're a military community by and large, and although the percent of active duty military members in the congregation right now is probably lower than it's ever been, we still are used to that, seeing people come and go. And so it doesn't come as a surprise to us sometimes when people say they're leaving. Now, it does come as a surprise to me when people say they're leaving, because where else could you possibly live that's like this place? Nowhere. So we're blessed to have a beautiful place to live in, and I could not ask for a better congregation than this one right here. And so anybody who would leave this voluntarily probably should have their head examined. Of course, there might be those that disagree with me, and of course you are entitled to your opinion, just keep it to yourself. So what's new? I'm leaving Thursday to go to Hawaii because somebody has to do it. And you know, if we don't go to Hawaii, the islands would go broke with no tourists. And so I just wish they wouldn't try to collect an entire year of income from one person, but that's the way it works. So we're talking about rounding up the strays. And, you know, the question is who does this? Who does this? You know, it's the same answer as we had last year. Oh, that's the elders and the ministers' job to go after the people that have somehow strayed away. But unfortunately, it isn't just their job. And so we can't say, oh, well, the elders let them get away, because we're responsible too. But how do you address it? We could look at a kind of a multifaceted approach and make a more engaging, authentic environment, if you will, having private, personal conversations with people. When you have people leave, try to understand why, if they'll tell you. But there are ways to address it. Sometimes sin is involved, and that's an uncomfortable situation for everybody. And so there are ways to deal with that, but not always do we know exactly how to handle it. The only thing I can tell you, and I'll probably repeat this again through this morning's time, is that we don't want to make it difficult for people to come back. Now, if sin is involved, we have to address it. Perhaps not we, but it needs to be addressed. But we should never make it impossible for somebody who left to come back. And so, to me, that's something that sometimes we overlook. People feel like, well, I can't come back. I just can't face those people. I can't deal with that environment. And maybe they can't. Maybe they can't. But, the bottom line is this everybody's problem. There's more than enough responsibility to go around. It doesn't matter how well the congregation functions. It doesn't matter what efforts we make to build up the body of believers. Some wander away. If you've been here as long as I have, and some of you have been here longer, if you've kept your directories, go through your directories and see what's happened over the last 30 years. Yes, I have directories that go back 30 years. I think I got directories that go back 40 years. But if you look at that contents in the directory and, well, where did these people go? And where did these people go? And, what happens? But even 5 or 10 years ago, you're going to see names missing, and you're going to wonder, well, what happened to them? How did they slip through the cracks? What did we do about those people? And some people we see some former members who attended here and no longer attend here, and we see them out in the community. We're not such a large metropolitan area that we can totally forget about people. Doesn't matter. In this town, you'll see somebody somewhere. And so, what do you do with this whole thing? I mean, it just doesn't matter how the church is organized. White people leave. Some people never fully integrate into the congregation. In other words, they never become a part, and they kind of stay out on the fringes. And when you never get into the congregation, it's easy to get out. If you have not committed yourself, if you were here last Sunday night, I talked about commitment. If you're not committed to being here, if you're not committed to working with the eldership, it's easy to sit out on the fringe edges and, drift away. And so it makes it easy to go. Some people get offended, by some word or some action, whether it's intentional or not. They might not like another member, I hope that I've never offended anybody so much that they would leave, but I can understand not liking me. I don't like me some days. David?
I think what's critical is for each person to have at least one good friend. If we can facilitate that in some way, then we need to.
I think, and what David said is very true. You've got to build a connection. The problem is, that's a two-way street. We are just as responsible for making a connection with somebody and not making it difficult. There's somebody in here, somebody among the people that are in this class right now, 150 of you, that I actually like. And so, well, some of you. But the truth is that you've got to have a relationship, and David's point is, get a friend. Get one good person you can talk to. Somebody that you can, associate with. If you can do that, you have a hook. You got a connection. And yes, that's very important. Some people, they just want to sit in a pew. They don't want to submit to the eldership. They don't want to be a part of the congregation beyond filling a seat in the pew and being there during worship services. But ask them to do anything else. Commit to the leadership. Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't play that game. I don't do that game. That's hard on everybody. It's hard on the eldership because they don't know, what's this person thinking? Why? What's going on? It's hard on the other members because they're, why? Why do you do that kind of thing? And so, and there's always sin. And some are simply lured away by the world. I mean, it is a thing. And so, they decide that they want to live a certain kind of a lifestyle, which does not happen to be in concert with what we teach in the church. And so it's easy for them to, walk away. And because they say, well, they won't really approve of what I'm doing right now. If you recall Jesus' parable of the sower in Matthew 13, It's instructive on this particular point because Jesus talks about the shallow commitment, the worldly concerns, persecution, the desire for riches that cause some to fall away. And so, when we look and see what the Bible says, we have to consider several things. Now, James South, he has a verse in his book that he kind of keys on, and this is one in James 5:19 and 20. And it says, "My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins." That's James' closing words to his letter to Christians. And James was really writing to Christians who kind of felt like they were on the fringe. They were not really, connected as well as it could be. And so he makes some very strong points in his letter about, how you get along and how you solve some problems. Very few people wake up one morning and decide to stop going to church. Oh, well, I got up this morning, I don't want to go to church anymore. You don't do it that way. It just doesn't work that way. It's almost always a gradual process, and it starts with kind of, I can miss Bible class. Bible class isn't important, and maybe it's not, but to me it's critical, especially this morning. But Bible class is something that is an important process. Or I don't want to come on Sunday nights. Nobody goes on Sunday nights. If you were not here last Sunday night, you missed probably the finest sermon that's ever been presented in this building. Just so you know. And if you weren't here, you didn't get to hear it. And so when you decide to skip out on a Sunday night, well, you just missed out. Not only did you miss a wonderful sermon, but you missed a few extra minutes to be with your brothers and sisters. There is no place, and I mean this, there is no place I would rather be than with you people. Even though I don't like some of you, I would still like to be with you. And I understand that some of you don't like me, and that's okay. We'll get around those things. I know, Paul, it's hard. But, in Hebrews, they warned about neglecting the meeting together, because it's indicative of spiritual weakening and someone beginning to move closer to the margins. And so when you miss an opportunity to worship together, which is another fellowship, it's not really a problem of an intent. It's more like neglect. And so, James in this passage did not single out shepherds or any other specific group within the church as being solely responsible for reclaiming those who wander away. Doing so is everybody's business. He says, if anyone among you, he didn't say if the shepherds among you, if the ministers among you, if the Bible teachers among you. He says, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, that someone is me. That someone is you. That someone might be a shepherd, might be a minister, but there's no exclusivity in the retrieval process. We are all responsible for reclaiming people who've wandered away. So, it's open to us to do this. Now, this passage from Luke is really too long to read. So basically, this passage and the other one we're going to look at in a second talk about, the lost sheep. And the perspective from Luke is slightly different. And he says, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." This is an idea that, even one is important. So when we identify a missing party, and of course, with 100 sheep, maybe it's easier than 250 sheep. But in this case, there was one shepherd one missing sheep. And so, I would still say that even with a handful of shepherds, it's still hard to keep up with 250 people plus people. And it's important for us to understand that they can't do it all. David's point about making a friend, over the years, I have been pretty close to a few people in the congregation, and if I'm not here, they're usually calling or texting or contacting me in some form or fashion that very day. Are you okay? Why aren't you here? Because once you become ingrained into a process, it's very easy for us to see that something's not right, you're missing. And so I consider it a privilege that somebody would think enough of me to contact me when I have missed. And at the same time, I have a responsibility to share if I know I'm not going to be around, And so that's kind of a two-way street. If I know I'm going to be gone, I'll usually tell somebody, hey, I'm going to be gone and I won't be here. And so in that light, there is that two-way kind of think about it and do what we have to do. The passage here in Matthew really, one of them has gone astray. The guy leaves the 99 to go look for the one that's gone astray. So while these parables probably record the same thing, the authors have a somewhat different perspective. Now in Luke 15, the previous passage, the point is the rejoicing of the shepherd when that one lost sheep was found. Oh, we found that lost sheep. It's wonderful. And in Matthew 18, the primary point really is that each sheep has its own value. And none are discounted. None are unimportant. None are expendable. And if you read the previous verses in Matthew 18, it becomes a little more obvious. Like in Matthew 18, 5 through 6, it says, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, but whoever causes one of these little ones to believe in me to sin, who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. Now, that's fairly graphic. And when you think about that, to lead a child of God astray is a grave sin. I mean, the idea of having this giant stone, and if you've ever been anywhere and seen these huge stone millstones where they used to grind the wheat to make bread, I mean, they weigh several hundred pounds. And, it's tied around the guy's neck and throw him in the sea. And, and in 1814, it says, it is not my will it is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these should perish. In other words, reclaiming those that have wandered away for whatever reason is a vital part of fulfilling the will of God. These are the things that we cannot overlook. The thing about it is it's a two-way street. I mean, while we need to be concerned about those who stray or just disappear, which isn't always it's also now, this may be a little more of a thing, but it's also our responsibility as disciples to not wander away. In other words, people leave for whatever reason. Some of them for legitimate reasons, some for not legitimate reasons. But as disciples, we are responsible not to leave. We should be desiring to be integrated into our local congregation. We want to be, a part of it. And like I said, the speaker last Sunday night presented this wonderful lesson on commitment, and it really kind of established the groundwork for the lesson today. This really is all about commitment. And again, if you missed that, you missed a great sermon. But, Hebrews 14:7 is instructive because it says, remember your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Okay, so one thing that's very important here is that our leaders need to be living exemplary lives. Now, none of us are perfect, and every single one of us have made mistakes. I'm including myself. And the truth is, it's hard sometimes not to have a bad thought. It's hard sometimes. I feel sorry for Ross because, he drives in town here, and he's not very complimentary to some of the drivers. But honestly, I'm not very complimentary to some of the drivers in this town. But the idea, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. And verse 9 says, don't be led away by diverse and strange teachings. Our responsibility is not to stray. Our responsibility is to emulate our leaders who are tasked with the responsibility of presenting worthy role models. So those kinds of responsibilities aren't to be taken lightly. To some who wanted to delay or compromise their discipleship, Jesus warned against putting one's hand to the plow and looking back. He said those aren't fit for the kingdom of God. Hebrews cautions the believers not to make shepherding their souls more difficult than it already is. In other words, we shouldn't be belligerent. We shouldn't be argumentative. We shouldn't be gripers. I will tell you, the shepherds have a fairly significant responsibility, and we cannot make their life any harder than it already is. It's not our lot. It's not our responsibility. While our leaders have a responsibility for the burden of our spiritual welfare, there is no point in making it any harder on them than it already is. Now, usually, it's not hard. Usually. But sometimes when it's hard, it's really hard. Sometimes when things are difficult, it's really difficult. And we have no idea what our elders, our shepherds, are dealing with sometimes. And if they seem distracted, they're probably dealing with something that's fairly significant. And it's up to us not to make it any harder on them than it already is. So, if we decide to miss church once in a while, you're just adding to the burden of the shepherds that have been placed in charge. That's a big deal. And so, not staying involved in different activities. There are so many activities in this congregation that everybody should find something that they want to do. Literally, we have everything in the sun going on. Yesterday we gave away, how much food did we give away yesterday, David? What do you do? There's that isn't complicated. And we had people out in the middle of Hollywood trying to wave people in and flag people down and wave at people and be friendly and, everything you can do. The truth is that there are opportunities to do something in this congregation for every single person. Nobody's really being left out of the process. Now, there may be some things that some of us are not as capable of doing as we used to be. I'm not really good at climbing ladders and getting on the roof anymore. But I look around the room here and I don't see a lot of you that ought to be climbing on ladders these days. But the truth is, we've got so many opportunities, and so I don't want my shepherds to have to give an account of my actions because I did something stupid, because I'm creating an unnecessary burden for them, People that decide that they want to come and go as they please, well, that's a deal. So we don't want to do that, There needs to be some kind of a system in place that no one simply falls through the cracks, And that's something I'm kind of concerned about. I don't think it's happening on purpose, but I do think it does happen. So, sometimes when we try to retrieve strays, they push back. The argument is, well, going to church isn't all there is to being a Christian. And, I agree. It isn't all there is to being a Christian, but it's definitely part of what it is to be a Christian, and we can't ignore it, But missing a service is usually, not always, but usually a sign of a larger problem. And so we sort of have to work through this from both sides. From the side of the person who decided to miss and the side of the person who's trying to, what happened to them, But because this is usually a sign of a larger problem, you need to figure out what it is. And so it won't always be possible. Our shepherds are tasked with an awesome responsibility, but there is no magic communication channel that tells them, oh, well, this person, they were all gone last Sunday. Now, sometimes we pick it up. It doesn't always manifest itself in a fashion that is really, really obvious. Is there a problem at somebody's home that somebody could help with? Is there an illness that caused somebody to miss or is discouraging or distracting? When people are sick, they're not thinking right. They're just not. When you're hurting, and I know this for a fact, it's a huge distraction. And you feel like, oh, I can't get into my normal mode of operation. And so, or is there a conflict with another member? You've got to watch for things like that. Is something need to be reconciled? Or is it just misplaced priorities? And that happens too, And that's more commonplace usually among new converts, is understanding the order and what's expected, But as a concerned shepherd and as a concerned member, we need to find a way to help a person who's stopped attending to see that, first of all, not attending is wrong, and also that it's not a solution. If you decide, oh, I'm mad at Dwayne because he looked at me funny, which he does every week, so I'm not going to church because I don't want him looking at me funny. Well, that's a concern. It's a concern, first of all, that I even care enough that Dwayne looks at me funny not to come to church. But it's also a concern that I have added to the burden of the shepherds by failing to come to a service that I should have been at. And so, assuming that you're physically able to attend and physically able means you're here, you're not in Hawaii. But assuming those things, you know, we need to be here. We need to be here, you know. We need to model the importance of being connected to each other and God. Our strength is not in our individual effort, although it's important. Our strength is being together with each other. We directly influence each other every single time we come together. So, as a active congregation with what I consider a strong core, we really shouldn't have anybody dropping out of the system without somebody knowing. Absentees will sometimes try to deflect your concern by saying, there's nothing to be concerned about, it's okay, you know, everything is fine. You know, when you ask somebody how they are today, what you expect to hear is fine. You know, that's what we expect to hear. It doesn't matter if everything's fine or not, but we're not very good about, you know, sharing things sometimes. But, you know, everything's not fine. So you've got to find a way to help an absentee person understand that the absentee itself is something to be concerned about. I mean, look at Hebrews chapter 10, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. Now, notice that stir up one another thing. Well, if I'm not here, I'm not stirring, and neither are you. And so it says, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more you see the day drawing near. You know? And then 10:26, for if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries. This is some very strong language in this passage, you know. Of course, that's a very stern warning about falling away. Of course, the person whose absence has no intention of that happening in most cases. Nobody ever does. But that's why Hebrews warns us. It's a hidden danger, you know, and it sometimes goes unseen, unrecognized. You know, sheep don't always recognize the hazards around them. Shepherds always should. So when we get tangled up in something that we shouldn't have gotten tangled up in, whether it's worldly distractions, whether it's I'm upset with somebody, whether it's, you know, whatever it is, it represents a hazard. And because it's a hazard, it represents a challenge to our shepherds to try to resolve. And trust me, our petty little disagreements with each other do not merit shepherd's intervention. We ought to be able to work that out on our own, you know. So the thing about it is when we're talking about this, it sounds like it's all, you know, oh, it's never a problem. However, if it was never a problem, we wouldn't be talking about it. It happens. It happens. You know, so what do you got to do? You know, we got to treat the problem, you know, not the symptom. Whatever you do, whether you're a shepherd or a concerned member, you know, you need to try to get to the heart of the problem and reclaim that person that's gone out the door. You know, we can't just say, you know, we miss you. You know, that's just, I don't know, to me, not enough. Hopefully we do miss them. You know, hopefully we do miss them. But, you know, missing them is not the crux of the matter. It's not the core thing. You know, So when we're dealing with people that have gone outside, we need to be very direct with them, and don't let the fact that they want to push it off to dissuade us from encouraging them to refocus on what's going on. You know, we got to seek to get their perspective. Now, I know that. You know, if there's conflict involved, and understand that conflict is a two-way street. Conflict can be my fault, but it can also be your fault. And so, but usually it's both. And if conflict is involved, it's usually better to have a private conversation. Gossip is never going to work. I mean, talking about a situation or talking about somebody, or, you know, making it look like they are truly in a bad place may be right, but it might not be the most effective way to do it. You know, follow the written guidance. I mean, now I know, you know, Christianity, as well as being an elder, a shepherd, it came with a complete manual. And if you're not sure about where that manual is, come see me after Bible class and I'll point it out to you. You know, we got instructions. We got instructions. You know, you got to focus on what is the issue. And that is sometimes the most difficult thing to get people to open up with. It's really easy to say, oh, don't worry about me, everything's okay. Don't worry about me, everything's okay. I'm just taking a break. Well, your break is causing heartache for other people. And so while it's difficult to make a direct correlation in some cases, it's also important for us to be able to find a way to effectively share our concerns about what's going on. You know, and what can we do? What can we do to reconcile the differences? What can we do to encourage you to come back? What can we do? You know, what is it we need to do? You know, sometimes, whether we believe it or not, sometimes we have to agree to disagree. We don't always all agree on every solution. It just doesn't happen. And there's some things that we might not fully understand, and we weren't meant to understand, but, you know, we have to figure out where we have working room and where you don't, but finding the common ground. And I've listened to some of you, and some of you are really, really good at conflict resolution, at finding a way to resolve problems. And so I want to commend you for that. I'm kind of a bull in a china shop. I kind of take the direct approach with, you know, right face, you know, coming in with the guns loaded. That's not always the best way to do it. It works sometimes. Yes, Wade?
Yeah, so I guess this will be the illustration of we can agree to disagree with part of what you've got in there, but I understand you're covering a very broad topic, right? It could cover a lot of different scenarios, but one of the things, like, be careful of, like, especially when we say we follow the written guidance, don't get legalistic about it, because there's been a lot of cases that I've watched and seen people say, well, we were just following the written guidance, but what you did is you drove somebody out the door, you know? Like, instead of having a mind of Christ,
So Wade's got a point about, I guess it really has to do with how aggressive we want to act. And he's using the term legalistic. And the idea is, we take a hard-headed approach, and there's no other way. It's my way or the highway. Now, when I was growing up in my house, that was my father's rule. But that doesn't always work when you're working with fellow Christians. It's not always the most effective way. And that's why I said there's a lot of you in here who are really good at conflict resolution. And you understand, there's a time to be tough, but sometimes a softer approach will be more effective. My concern, and it's not a concern, but we need to make sure that everybody understands that we don't compromise on biblical matters. In other words, if we've got clear guidance, then we have to basically observe the guidance that we have. Yeah, Brian?
I was going to say, a softer approach is still an approach.
A softer approach is still an approach. Brian's right. I mean, it is still an approach. And in a lot of cases, it's effective. There's no question about it. And so it's probably better to start that way than go in with the bull in the china shop approach, because it tends to get people up on get their hackles up. In other words, it's fight or flight, and what I want to do is fight, and what you want to do is, yeah, Wade?
Let me clarify one thing too. When I said that I watched that happen, it's not here. I'll be very clear. It's not here that I've seen that happen. It's other places in my experience.
Yeah, well, Wade was saying that the thing he's talking about, he doesn't see that happening here. But the point is still well made. It can, Some of us have a less than softer approach. And so that makes it difficult. I mean, we're not always going to be effective in retrieving people. We're not. It's just understand that. We need to do the very best that we can. But no matter what we do, some people are going to fall away. It's just going to happen. Some seeds, they don't bear as much fruit as others. But that doesn't mean they're not bearing fruit, in spite of perfect conditions. But none of the seeds in the parable of the sower that went on the less than optimal conditions produced anything. It didn't produce anything. And so I'm trying to make sure that we don't miss something when that happens. Okay, Randy?
I'm just going to say a past event in my life, years and years and years ago, back before, well, anyway, I was a member of a congregation who withdrew from people who had not been to church for a while. I always thought that was a
Randy's talking about he's a member of a congregation that withdrew from people. There are reasons that.
because they had by de facto already, those who had failed to come to church had already withdrawn from the congregation.
And that's true. Once you've fallen out, you've actually withdrawn. There's no point to, yeah. Clay?
We're not in unity, speaking the same thing, doing the same thing, but with division. Once we have the division, we have those split.
Yeah, now and that happens. I mean, we've seen people that they disagree and they split. In other words, they go their own ways, and I'm never really fond of that approach. But it is no matter how hard we try. But the word church, ecclesia, means assembly, and this is back to Randy's point. A person that chooses not to assemble with the church, well, they pretty much made that decision to withdraw. That doesn't mean I want to ignore them. I don't want to ignore them. And of course, the bell has rung. I have 17 more slides, but I appreciate all of your comments this morning, and I'll try to do better with my time management if I'm ever asked to speak again. Thank you very much.